Hello, my name is Cheryl Pollard. I'm a mother, daughter, wife, sister, and an auntie. I've spent my whole life on the Métis homeland, and most of which has also been in Treaty 6. I currently reside in Treaty 4, with current and frequent incursions into Treaty 6 territory. When I introduce myself, what do you hear? Did you hear the beginning of a story about connections? I've been asked to join the conversation today about Indigenizing nursing education. I'm excited to join this conversation with you. Unfortunately, I'm not there with you all today. As I share this presentation and my thoughts with you, I do so trusting the allegiances built with Dr. Davies and Dr. Clune as these ideas are shared. These ideas are shared in the spirit of enabling you to make choices. During this conversation, we will be discussing issues of colonialism, the culture of white supremacy, historical harms in nursing educational practices. Some of you may experience some triggering. Please take care of yourself and seek support as needed. You may have noticed that I started a land acknowledgement already with my introduction. The land acknowledgements are an important way of recognizing that we have a connection with Indigenous peoples and with the land upon which we currently reside. The land acknowledgements are really a way to recognize the importance of the relationship as we move forward. As you start to think about your own land acknowledgements, what will you include in yours? What's important to you? What relationships do you hold dear? Today we will be discussing what indigenization means within the context of nursing education. We'll also touch on tokenness and moving from tokenistic inclusion to meaningful integration of Indigenous ways of knowing and worldviews. We'll also come up with some ideas and have some discussion around successful curriculum changes, really that introduce and honor Indigenous ways of knowing. This isn't an easy path to take, and the road is often filled with challenges, so we will talk about some of those challenges. And many people will ask, well, where do you start? You start with relations. This is where Dr. Davies or Dr. Clune may want to pause the video to have a discussion with you. I would like to get a better understanding of what you think indigenization means. Why do we need to do indigenization? I guess part of that question is, do we even need to do it? And why? Some people say it has to do with treaty responsibilities, but what does that mean? Some say that it has to do with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or even with UNTRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or basic human rights. It's hard to think sometimes that nursing education is related to human rights. I wish I could be there to hear your thoughts and ideas. As you talk about indigenization and what that means, it has been more than 10 years since the Truth and Reconciliation has made their recommendations. And so I'm curious as to what you think, what you have seen, what you have done related to, has it made a difference so far? Has the Truth and Reconciliation and Indigenization improved the lives of Indigenous peoples? Has it improved our relationship with Indigenous peoples? When we come back and think about the question, what difference does indigenization make? Indigenization, the biggest difference that it is intended to make is to prepare nurses to practice without bigotry, hate, or fear. How we are educating nurses and how nurses are treating patients within the healthcare settings is a display of what they think is valuable and what they think is important. As we can see from health outcome studies, Indigenous peoples are not receiving the same outcomes. We can extrapolate from there to think about perhaps that means that they're not receiving the same care. I'd like to hear what you think about this. One of the most common questions is, what do we mean by Indigenous? Does Indigenous mean that they're the first peoples? Well, partly. Does Indigenous mean that they are part of a group that isn't part of the mainstream? Perhaps. When I talk about Indigenous, I think about Indigenous peoples, and that peoples are not singular. What you'll see in some of my writings is that the S's seem to get ahead of themselves. I will write about peoples. Others will critique that and talk about people. No, indigeneity is a kaleidoscope. It is a cacophony of different beliefs, different languages, some different approaches. If we think about the global population, there's approximately 6% of the global population that is Indigenous. Some are First Nations, some are Inuit, and some are Métis. There are many nurse educators that ask, where do you start with indigenization? Indigenization means so many things to so many different people. How do we actually take the first step? Many nursing educators have asked, where do we start? How do we know what to do? The first thing that we need to do is ask ourselves, why was nursing education called out in the calls to action? When we look around the calls to action, other industries, other professions were called out when there was a significant impact on the health of Indigenous peoples. Indigenization in nursing education refers to a transformative process that integrates Indigenous knowledge systems alongside Western biomedical models. It's not a superficial addition of Indigenous content, but a systemic shift in how curricula are designed, taught, and evaluated. The evaluation piece not only holds to the curriculum itself, but part of the curriculum is how students are evaluated as well. This approach acknowledges the historical and ongoing impacts of colonization on health and education, really aiming to create a culturally safe learning environment that respects Indigenous worldviews. Indigenization involves incorporating oral traditions, the hows, land-based learning, again another how, and the holistic health perspectives into key program areas. And key program areas within nursing education are all of the core curriculum components. For example, some institutions have instituted modules on traditional healing practices and community-based care models rooted in Indigenous philosophies. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action emphasize the need for such changes, particularly in health education, to address disparities and foster reconciliation. By embedding Indigenous perspectives throughout the curriculum, educators prepare nurses to deliver care that is culturally responsive and equitable. This process also requires collaboration with Indigenous communities to ensure authenticity and relevance. Ultimately, indigenization benefits all learners by broadening their understanding of health beyond the biomedical paradigm, promoting respect and improving patient outcomes. As nurses, as we reflect on the meta-paradigm of nursing, we can see that incorporating indigenization lines up fairly well with that meta-paradigm. Some nursing programs have instituted the use of the meta-paradigm as a way to guide indigenization of their curriculum. Tokenism in nursing education often manifests as isolated lectures or brief mentions of Indigenous health issues without deeper integration into the course or into the curriculum. Such practices fail to challenge systemic inequities or foster cultural safety. Moving beyond tokenism requires embedding Indigenous perspectives across all aspects of nursing education, including theory, clinical practice, assessment, and evaluation. For instance, rather than offering a single cultural competency workshop, programs can incorporate Indigenous case studies into clinical simulations, invite elders, knowledge keepers, helpers to co-teach courses, and design assessments. Not only designing assessments, but designing evaluation rubrics that really encourage students to engage with Indigenous health frameworks. Relationship building with Indigenous communities is essential to avoid tokenistic approaches and to ensure that curriculum changes are meaningful and respectful. This involves ongoing dialogue by co-creation of learning materials and the recognition of Indigenous intellectual property. By shifting from tokenism to authentic integration, nursing education can cultivate graduates who are prepared to provide culturally safe care and advocate for health equity. This transformation aligns with accreditation standards, UNDRIP, and the TRC. It is really a broader way of achieving goals of reconciliation within the healthcare system. I've always found it quite interesting when people talk about indigenizing the curriculum. As mentioned on the previous slide, oftentimes I think about it as, well, let's add in a case study. Let's bring in elder to provide a blessing. But yet when we talk about indigenization of the curriculum, we mean the whole thing. So as we talk about the components of the curriculum and whatever curricular model you are using or that you're learning, there's really 8 components that indigenization will affect. Indigenization will affect the learning objectives and learning outcomes. It will impact the content that's being delivered, not just the content of one lecture, but the content of each of the lectures. Indigenization will also impact instructional methods. We talk about land-based learning. What does that mean within a med-surg course? What could that mean in a nursing leadership course? Learning activities are also guided and directed by the worldviews of faculty. Indigenization will also hit learning activities, assessment and evaluation, the types of resources and materials that we use. Indigenization is much more than a cursory, here's two-eyed seeing and this is what it looks like. No pun intended. The scope and sequence. Indigenization will impact scope and sequence. And indigenization will also impact standards and alignment. One of the examples of this is actually with the College of Registered Nurses of Saskatchewan, who has added approval standards related to inclusion of Indigenous course content and the inclusion of Indigenous nursing students and nursing graduates. Most educators recognize the 24th call to action, ensuring that there is an Indigenous health course within their program. From my vantage point, there are actually 9 calls to action that directly impact nursing education. It is important that we start to talk about these calls and how our responsibilities are shared and shaped. A couple of the other calls to action that also impact nursing education are those calls related to business reconciliation. Procurement is identified in call to action 92, and the need to support international students, specifically newcomers, to understand and get support related to the impact of treaties in residential schools. Let's take a step back now and look at our own course. Let's think about our course together. First of all, let's spend a few minutes individually looking at our course outlines. Review the course. What are the individual perspectives that you see coming through your course outlines? Are the perspectives embedded and are they threaded throughout the course, or is it a one-off? If there is time, this might be a place where the facilitators will stop this recording and have you talk about your experiences, talk about your thoughts about the course outline, and how might we actually integrate Indigenous knowledge meaningfully throughout an entire course. I hope that you've had an opportunity to look through and walk through your course outline, seeing where the Indigenous knowledges are coming through. Next, we're going to explore some practical examples of indigenization in nursing education. These include land-based learning experiences, integration of Indigenous case studies, involvement of elders in classroom teaching. Land-based learning allows students to engage with health concepts in natural environments, guided by Indigenous knowledge keepers, helpers, and fosters a holistic understanding of wellness. The land-based learning opportunities really give us an opportunity to integrate nursing's meta paradigm. These types of initiatives not only help to bridge cultural gaps, they definitely enriches classroom experiences and discussions. These initiatives not only enhance cultural competence, but also meet accreditation requirements for diversity and inclusion. For example, some nursing programs have developed partnerships with Indigenous communities to co-create curriculum content. And when we think about in curriculum content, remember that's all those pieces of the curriculum, not just the blessing at the beginning of class. Others have introduced models or modules on traditional healing practices alongside biomedical approaches. This allows a promotion of a more comprehensive view of health. These changes demonstrate that indigenization is achievable, certainly through intentional design and purposeful collaboration. They also highlight the importance of institutional support, faculty training, and resource allocation to sustain these efforts. Implementing indigenization in nursing education presents both challenges and opportunities. Common barriers include institutional resistance to change, limited faculty knowledge of worldviews, limited valuing of alternative worldviews, and resource constraints such as funding and time. These types of obstacles can hinder efforts to integrate Indigenous perspectives meaningfully. However, opportunities do exist to overcome these challenges through strategic initiatives. Building partnerships with Indigenous communities is a critical step. It fosters trust and ensures curriculum changes are culturally appropriate. Faculty development programs can also equip educators with skills and knowledge needed to understand curriculum content and to deliver Indigenous content effectively. Policy support at institutional and governmental levels can provide the necessary resources and mandate for indigenization. Additionally, incorporating indigenization into curriculum standards creates opportunities and encourages widespread adoption. By leveraging these opportunities, nursing education can move forward toward a more inclusive and equitable model that benefits both students and the communities that we serve. Ultimately, addressing barriers and capitalizing on opportunities requires a commitment to reconciliation and a recognition of the value of Indigenous knowledge in healthcare. Additionally, one of the pieces that is absolutely critical for these barriers to be overcome is that of cultural humility and building culturally safe spaces. Cultural safety and humility are foundational concepts in indigenizing nursing education. Cultural safety goes beyond cultural competence by focusing on creating environments where patients feel respected, valued, and free from discrimination. It requires healthcare providers to recognize and address power imbalances and systemic inequities. Cultural humility complements this by emphasizing lifelong learning, self-reflection, and openness to different worldviews. Unlike competence, which can imply mastery, humility acknowledges that understanding culture is an ongoing process. In practice, cultural safety and humility involve listening to patients' experiences, incorporating their perspectives into care plans, and challenging institutional norms that perpetuate inequity. For example, nurses can demonstrate cultural humility by engaging in reflective practice and seeking guidance from Indigenous knowledge keepers. These concepts are critical for improving patient outcomes, building trust, and advancing reconciliation in healthcare. Embedding cultural safety and humility into nursing curricula ensures that graduates are prepared to provide care that is not only clinically effective, but also culturally responsive and respectful. This next slide is a reminder about cultural safety and humility, and that they are on a continuum. Years ago, we started to talk about cultural awareness with understanding that there are more than one culture. Then we moved on to cultural sensitivity, cultural competence, and then cultural humility. Cultural safety is actually the outcome that we are wanting to achieve. Where do we go from here? Indigenization is a journey that requires commitment, collaboration, and continuous learning. Educators and institutions must move beyond symbolic gestures and to implement systemic changes that honor Indigenous knowledge and promote cultural safety. A practical starting point is identifying one concrete action to integrate Indigenous perspectives into teaching or curriculum design. This could involve revising course objectives to include Indigenous health frameworks, inviting elders, knowledge keepers to come and participate in classroom discussions, or developing partnerships with Indigenous communities. Reflection is an absolutely essential piece of indigenizing the curriculum. Educators will need to regularly assess our own biases, assumptions, and practices to ensure alignment with Indigenous goals. By taking intentional steps, nursing education can contribute to reconciliation and improve the health outcomes for Indigenous peoples. The call to action is clear: embrace humility, build relationships, and commit to transforming education for a more equitable future. We've reached the end of our time together, and I want to say thank you for the invitation to speak with you and to share this dialogue. I wish you all a joy as you discover and learn new things in your educational journey. Please stay curious, stay focused, and never be afraid to ask questions.